Hello. I want to welcome you all to our first ever virtual training for our leadership for 2021. I want to thank all those who are returning for the 2021 year on all of our ministry teams and for all those who said yes last fall as we were prayerfully discerning leadership for this year. And we welcome you to um, this season together. Normally, we have a half day or full day training in January each year to kind of orient ourselves to the work and ministry ahead of us. And we also set some priorities, remind ourselves of who we are, both as United Methodist and who we are at Swansbury United Methodist Church, what our mission, vision, and core values are, and what kinds of specific things we might be looking at this year that helps all of our ministry areas to think about their work, their priorities, the goals that they might set, and the benchmarks for how they might achieve them. So that's all a prayerful process. And I'm hoping that just this short resource video will help give you some of those tools. We're going to ask that you watch this. I hope you can watch the whole thing before our first council meeting, which is coming up near the end of the month on that Wednesday. So with that, again, I want to welcome you and walk you through some of the content that I have for you today. So first off, I want to remind us of our mission statement. You can find this on the website. It correlates with the mission statement for the United Methodist Church, which is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And we have had for quite a few years now the mission statement that is in alignment with that one: worship God, love one another, serve the world. We also know that there are core values that we use to lift this up, and you'll see this on our website as well. And you have the corresponding address for the web there at the bottom of this slide. We're committed to making disciples who make disciples. We believe that every believer is gifted, called, and has a unique purpose in God's kingdom. One of the key ways we make disciples is by inviting and equipping every believer to embody at least 4 marks of discipleship. These aren't fully inclusive, but at least they are the basics that we lift up: worship, connect, serve, and give. As you may be reminded, we've had to do that in very different ways this past 10 months since the coronavirus and the pandemic began last March. We've had unprecedented challenges this past year. I'm excited to tell you that I think we have finished the year strong. There have been lots of creative ways that people have responded in our church and in our leadership to the needs that have emerged, both those who are struggling in our community for food insecurity or assistance in other ways, for remote learning that's happening now at the church with the partnership with the YMCA, for our partnership with the town that now is allowing part of Building 2 to be used as an emergency operations center should we need it in the future, for all the ways that we are we finished strong with our financial giving. Yes, we did apply for and get forgiven a PPP loan this past year. We were able to make staff who were on furlough in March or in, I think it was April, whole by the year's end, and to end the year in the black. Even though we had reduced expenses, we were able to meet all of our financial obligations. In addition to that, we also paid an additional $118,000, close to $400, more on the principal of our debt in building number 3. So overall, it's been an amazing way to see how God's worked, even given the challenges that we have faced. So I wanted to suggest some goals for how we might think as a larger church community leaning into 2021. For those that don't know, I have sent out a financial year's end letter that reminds us that 2021 we'll be celebrating our 150 years of ministry in Swansboro. It was back on March 1st, 1871, I wanted to make sure I got the date right. 1871, when around 15 families came together and formed what would later become Swansburg United Methodist Church. That's an amazing legacy. One of the ways I think we can celebrate that is in worship, which we hope to do the first Sunday in March. We also I want you to consider a campaign that we'll be talking about with stewardship to retire our debt, if not by year's end, to at least set the campaign in motion to expeditiously move towards retiring the remaining debt we have on Building 3, which I think because of our extra payments is close to 1.6, maybe a little under 1.6 million that we still carry on that loan. A second goal for this year, I hope to elevate communication and connection with a particular emphasis on trying to make sure that we identify and reach out to those who have been unreached or disconnected in these past 10 months. But also to find ways that both in person and virtually, we might improve the way that we communicate, lift up, celebrate the ministry that has happened, and also identify the emerging needs. A third goal I want us to consider, and this may, like I said, have an effect on all of our team and work areas as we think about our work this year. I'd like us to consider expanding participation in all areas of ministry. That means in-person worship and virtual worship. That means small groups and discipleship and Sunday school. That means in our commitment to various service in our community and in our church, and to our generosity, both in tithes and offerings and in the ways that we seek to tackle debt and other generous giving to missions beyond our local church. Prayerfully consider these and how they might shape your work together. I also thought it would be helpful to just remind us of who we are as a United Methodist Church. I have a colleague in ministry who likes to talk about the gift. I mean, there's a lot of things you could say about our church, but the gift of what it means to be United Methodist, the unique contribution that we make to the larger Church of Christ around the world of every denomination and of every communion, is that we have an emphasis on a lot of things, but particularly on what's often called grace upon grace and connection upon connection. Now, the grace upon grace line comes directly from John chapter 1, verse 16, where we read, "The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we have received grace upon grace." One of the unique contributions of Methodism is that salvation is a way, a via salutis. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not kind of a one and done. It's not just about the wedding day when we first come to Christ, as important as that is. It's about the marriage. It's about our life together. It's about growing in our love of God and our love of neighbor, living into that great commandment. One of the ways we talk about that in the Methodist Church is referred to as prevenient grace, justifying grace, and sanctifying grace. Prevenient grace is that grace that goes before, that prepares us for a life of Christ, even when we may not even be aware that God is working on us, pursuing us, drawing us, wooing us into a loving relationship with our Creator and Savior. I'm reminded of Psalm 139, even before you were in the womb, before you were born, I knew you, your inward parts. God is always going before us, even before we acknowledge God's activity in our lives. Justifying grace. That's the grace that brings us into right relationship with God. That's the yes of those who stand before the church as confirmands or professions of faith that say, I say yes to God's yes to me in Jesus. And through repentance and forgiveness and restoration, our relationship is made right. That relationship that was broken by sin and disobedience. Sanctifying grace. That's continuing life together with God, that we might continue to grow from grace to grace, from love to love. Wesley would refer to this also as holiness of heart and life. The illustration is often used of the house. And if you think about the life with God, then the porch would be prevenient grace. The door upon entry would be justifying grace. And life together with the family of God and in Christ would be life within the house or the home. Not just grace upon grace, but connection upon connection is unique to the United Methodist Church. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview, but I did that in the form of a graphic here on this slide. Swansboro United Methodist Church is a local church or charge. Now, there are some charges in our conference that are multiple charges or multiple churches, one charge, but multiple churches. We are what's called a station charge, one church for our charge conference. Now, our administrative council or church council meets mostly on a monthly basis, but in the fall, after we have consulted with the district superintendent and gotten a schedule of the fall charge conferences, we will know when our annual charge conference will meet, which is composed of all the members of the church council who will meet to discuss and plan for the year ahead. We will set our leadership for 2022 this fall, usually September, October, or November. We will set the budget for the coming year. We will vote on pastor salaries and compensation. And we will also affirm our commitment to our apportionment giving that also connects us in missional giving, both here and around the world. We're also part of a geographic area in eastern North Carolina known as the Sound District. Now, our area for the Sound District, we have a district superintendent who oversees that area. His name is John Strother. If you haven't met him, I hope you'll get to meet him soon. He was a speaker at our Advent service, one of our Advent services this past December. The Sound District goes as far south as Sneed's Ferry, upwards to just south of the Pamlico River, and I think as far east as close to Greenville, Farmville area. The Sound District is a part of the larger North Carolina Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, which is composed of most of eastern North Carolina from around Burlington towards the coast. So that area is presided over by our current bishop, Bishop Hope Morgan Ward. Now, all of the annual conferences in the southeastern part of the United States, and that includes conferences in both Virginia and North Carolina. There's 2 in our state, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and maybe some others. Those conferences make up what is called the southeastern jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church, one of 5 jurisdictions throughout the United States. Now, the jurisdiction meets every 4 years. And the primary purpose of the jurisdiction is usually to elect and deploy bishops for each of the episcopal areas or annual conferences in their jurisdiction. And then at a global level, internationally, there is the General Conference, which is a meeting that happens every 4 years, usually for around 2 weeks. It also oversees not only all of the 5 jurisdictions in the United States, but all the central conferences that are located on other continents around the world, including Europe, Africa, Asia, and others. Many of you may know there was a general conference that was scheduled for last year that has been postponed. Right now, it is tentatively rescheduled for September of 2021. And I know we are keeping an eye on whether that can still happen given the situation with the pandemic and the concerns for international travel. Now, when it comes to the United Methodist Church here at Swansboro, I like to describe our work together as 2 wings of a plane to keep us moving in the right direction, flying in a way that helps equip and empower the saints, all of us, for ministry. So the 2 wings could be described as mission and ministry on one side and the executive teams on the other. Now, I've listed some of those here, and this might not be fully inclusive, so if I've missed some, please forgive me. But some of those mission and ministry teams might include your group. evangelism, hospitality, worship, Sunday school, student ministries, Swan Life Groups, education team, prison and disaster recovery, our C4C, communications, missions, stewardship, the food pantry, all of our recovery groups, AA and NA, our prayer teams, our childcare team, safe sanctuaries, Appalachian Service Project teams and security teams. I'm sure there's others as well. Then also on the other wing is the executive teams that administratively support and attend to those tasks so that ministry can be carried forward in this place faithfully and with a high level of accountability and visibility. That includes our lay leadership, which makes nominations each year and was the process by which you were asked to serve this year. It includes our trustees over building and all of our liquid assets and the maintenance of our property as well. It includes the staff parish relations committee, which is a kind of personnel committee that's supportive of all of our staff and pastors, as well as interacts with them and the congregation to address both support and concerns and needs as they arise relating to our staff. Our finance team, and of course also the staff, which seek to help equip and empower all of these teams as well. So for the administrative council, I'd like us to consider when we meet a way to frame what we do. I know in the past we spent a lot of time reporting and celebrating, and those are all good things. We should begin, as we have a tradition of doing here at the church, lighting of the Christ candle, prayers, celebrations, things to lift up, and concerns as we pray and begin our work together. I also think it would be helpful, though, for us to then move quickly through what some call a consent calendar. We address the minutes if there's any corrections or additions, and written reports, if possible, be submitted ahead of time so we don't spend the whole meeting just reporting on what's been done before this meeting. Then we can spend a little more time in our meetings with conversation. Are there things that each area might want to bring that require discussion or discernment? Is there any dreaming we should do as a church about what God's calling us to do? And then are there any actions for commitment? Any actions that need to be brought up so that we can see if there's consensus in moving forward? And then the credibility part of that. What are the benchmarks? Who are the point people that will carry the ball in between our meetings and let us know how things are going the next time we gather? How will we know if we've done it? Now, to live into this type of guided meeting, here's what we would need from all of our team leaders. To upload reports for your area before each meeting so the rest on the council can read it beforehand. Communicate to the chair or the vice chair any items coming up for discussion or commitment and action. And commit to praying for each other and over our ministry areas on a regular basis. Now, we have done this off and on without maybe articulating it in quite this way, but I thought I would lift it up as maybe a pattern for how we could move the ball down the field each time we gather and get a sense of momentum, as well as some celebration about what's happening and what maybe God is calling us to do. Now, I wanted to do a little bit of a calendar overview with you, and I broadly want to talk about 2021 in 4 quarters to kind of help each of our ministry areas think about what that looks like. So for the first quarter, which would be January through March, and I know we're already almost halfway, I'm calling this define and redefine goals. Take a look again at our mission statement, our core values, some of the visioning goals that I've suggested, or maybe some others that we come up with as a council. Set a calendar for your team. Make connections with other teams on the council and in the church who you might need to collaborate with or who could support you in carrying out your mission as well. Here's some guiding questions for those that meet in this first quarter? How does your team fulfill the mission, vision, and core values of the larger church? What might need to be considered to align or realign with the mission and core values? What resources are needed? I know each of you have a budgeted amount probably that has already been set, but if it's financial resources, if it's people resources, if it's volunteers or planning, these are all things that are good to identify so that you can then assign people to address them. Who do you need to partner with, both in the church or in the larger community, to help achieve those mission goals? So the second quarter, which would be April to June, here's a way to think about that season. I'm calling it interpret and witness. Here's some of the guiding questions. What priorities need your attention? Are there any benchmarks that you've already begun to check off as you move towards achieving the goals that you've already set in the first quarter? Are there ways that you can or have been communicating that mission and vision? Can you celebrate the wins? Can you communicate the needs? What are you discovering as you continue your work together about neighbors and about yourselves and ourselves as a church? So the third quarter, July through September. Now, I didn't put this in there, but I will say that to me, one of the best practices for a lot of churches is to consider July as a sabbatical month where you won't necessarily meet unless there's a pressing issue that needs to be brought before your team. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm granting permission if you needed it, or we should discuss this at council, how we could maybe have 1 month out of the year. Sometimes we do that in December, except for those necessary teams that should meet as well. But July is one of those seasons in the year where many of us are still getting ready to come back to school in the fall, getting ready to gear up for things at the end of summer. It can just serve as a good break month for those that are meeting on a monthly basis. I do, however, understand some will still want to meet if there's pressing matters to discuss or make decisions about. I'm calling this quarter refining and reaching. Here's some guiding questions to lead your work. What needs to be celebrated? What needs to be measured? Who should you partner with that could extend your work or ministry? What resources do you still need as you look both towards the end of the year and then planning for 2022? And then finally, the fourth quarter, October through December. I'm calling this season accountability and alignment. Here's some guiding questions for this part of the year. What resources do you anticipate needing for the coming year? So your budgeting process begins more earnestly once the early fall has begun. What have you done that needs to be celebrated and communicated? We hope to bring that kind of news to our charge conference when that date is set. We also want to lift this up on other mediums, not just in announcements or praise and prayers emails, but other forms and media that allow the church to see what's been happening, how their commitment, their service, their witness, their generosity has been making an impact. And we would like to find ways for you to communicate how that's been happening from your area. And how does our work this year bring us closer to our vision? I'll talk more about the 4 Ds of appreciative inquiry and planning for next year in a few moments. So one of the ways that we hope this might help you in your work is when you meet with your team, you might consider using SMART goals. There is on our website, under the My Church part of the website, a spreadsheet, kind of a guiding sheet. I think I have a copy here that I will show you, but we will put this on the web so that you can use it as kind of a guide. SMART is an acronym for specific, making specific goals, measurable ones where you know there's some kind of measurable progress. You'll know how you've achieved what you were hoping to do. Things that are actionable and assigned to specific people. Sometimes this is very important so that you're not just meeting as often as you are, whether that's monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, but you have specific people that are carrying the water, so to speak, in between the meetings. Relevant. Is it aligned with the broader personal values and organizational values of the church? Important for it to be time-bound. Set some dates or benchmarks for when you want certain parts of your goals to be achieved. I also want to share with you the 4D process. Many of you may be familiar with this from last year, and certainly I know the staff are familiar with this process. I've asked them to use this in dreaming and beginning to prayerful discernment about various areas of ministry. It's a part of appreciative inquiry. It's a part of thinking about not just on where the problems are or where those areas of concerns are. If this were professional or personal development, it's not just focusing on the weaknesses, even though you address those. It's about focusing on the strengths, the places that give life, the things that are going well. And you can do this with every ministry, any activity, any special kind of event. You could do this with Vacation Bible School, for example. After Vacation Bible School, it happens. If we got that team, that leadership team together soon after the event, they could go through a 4D process, a debrief that helps them think about what went well, what would we like to see more of. If we could remove all obstacles, what would be the big dream of what we would hope to accomplish should we continue this kind of ministry next year? And then what would be the design elements? What are the specifics? Even if that dream feels unattainable, even if it's a God-sized dream that requires miracles to achieve, what would be some specific concrete steps towards moving towards that dream? That would be the design. And then the deliver. How can we then get specific point people that might be able to follow up on different tasks in order to help execute what we're trying to do? You can do this both as a debrief process. You can also do it as a dreaming discernment process. As we pray about what do we want our student ministries to look like? What would we like our evangelism and hospitality ministries to look like? What's the best of what's happening? Spend some time in that discovery phase. That's the first part. Discover is the first part, dream, design, and deliver. But spend some time with that discover. Make a long list of what are we doing well? What is giving life? What's the best of what is? And then begin to do the dreaming about what could be. If money were no object, if volunteers were no object, and then scaling that back, designing it, and delivering it. That was a real quick 4D introduction, but I'd love to tell you more. We have a lot of resources and other tools that can be used to help you if you'd like to use that tool as well. A lot of people want to know about the budgeting process and how the finances work for each of our areas and for the larger church. So just an overview. In July, the conference will send us expected apportionments based on a formula. So that will be an estimate of what we will be paying in our fair share for 2022. And then in August and September, I left out July because if we've taken a sabbatical in our teams. But in August and September, the staff parish will gather. They'll recommend pastor's salary and benefits, all in preparation for church conference. The trustees at this time usually begin in earnest to assess the needs for the remaining part of the year, see if that aligns with the budget that they have left, and also to assess any contract cost or changes that they might expect for year's end or for the next fiscal year. And they might need to also identify any large maintenance needs that need to happen or could be delayed until 2022 and beyond. That's all part of the priming the pump for our budgeting for the next year. Stewardship will then also finalize their work for the fall. We usually have our stewardship campaign in October, with a commitment Sunday, usually on the last Sunday of that month. They will then, over the course of the next month or two, sometimes even through year's end, be receiving commitments as we assess giving for 2022. In October and November, that work moving towards assessment and budgeting begins more in earnest. Our ministry teams need to do your work. I'd like you to think in terms of a zero-based budget. Don't just add a percentage to what you got last year, but think about what are the concrete things you would like to do. Try to assign specific things in your thinking that fit into your goals, your priorities, and the larger mission of the church. Send those requests to the finance chair and the finance secretary. The stewardship team will continue to raise commitments for the following year, 2022. The charge conference, when that's scheduled, will then meet and approve pastor salaries and the leadership for the next year. The finance team will review expected income that's coming in and the budget request that's been coming from each team. They will then make recommendations to the church council for approval. The SPRC will then also meet and finalize all other recommendations for all the other staff salaries to the church council as well. And then in November, December, the church council will meet to finalize and approve the budget for 2022. Now, I wanted you to see our budget for this year, and it was hard to do budgeting, honestly, this past year because of COVID. So many things changed, and they still are in a lot of flux. So we may need to revisit our budget throughout the year, and if there's concerns or if there's areas that need to go over your line items, just bring that to our council meeting or let the chair or vice chair know prior to a meeting, see if that can be added to the agenda for discussion. But I wanted you to see what the current budget, the way it was approved last year, is for this year. I just picked the large areas so that you could see them. Staff is at 41%, property maintenance at 17%, administrative at 5%, debt reduction is at 20%, operations at 3%, ministry areas at 6%. I did want you to notice that our apportionments is less than what some people might consider the tithe and our larger connection. It's 8% of our current budget for 2021. And those dollars go not just to the annual conference, some of them come back locally. Many of you may or may not know this, but the apportionment dollars benefit us in many ways, not in just helping the larger connection that support other churches, our conference, our Episcopal area, ministries and mission, both internationally and around our jurisdiction and nation, but also back when Florence happened, the conference was very quick to send money towards us to help us. I think there was a $50,000 contribution that came very quickly. And just so you know too, last year we applied to the conference for COVID-19 funds to help us, like a grant to help us with some of our costs. And we received $10,000 for salary support last year for the pastors. We received an additional $20,000, I think, for mission and ministry program type cost. And I think we're also receiving health and pension coverage for the first 3 months of this year for both Pastor Adam and myself. So Carol or Christy could help me with the totals of what the value of that grant is. But again, just another example of how that connection works in both directions. And we're thankful to God for the missional impact of how together we're stronger than we are alone. So I'm working to get the My Church part of the website updated so that you will have these things there by the time you see this video. On the swansboroumc.org website, if you go to the bottom on any page, you'll see the My Church link. That's where we keep our information for our leaders and for those who are members. The rest of the website is mainly a front page or a front door for our visitors, but we wanted you to have these resources. This is more of our online file cabinet. There you will find church council, and under that, some training and helps and resources. I'm hoping soon we'll be having an additional video that will help anybody who wants to use Traction, which is a book and a resource that we've been utilizing at our staff meetings every week now for almost the last year. Dr. Lane helped us and train us to kind of do this process that really does help move our meetings and help us accomplish things and celebrate those things on a weekly basis. So we're planning to put together a short training video if you want to use Traction in the ways that you lead your meetings. I'd especially suggest that for some of our executive teams, if you really want to move the ball down the field in between meetings. We also have all of the digital handbooks online for each of the areas that are printed by the Methodist Publishing House. So we'll share those links if you haven't already seen them or downloaded them. We have our 2021 leadership document there. And I've asked Alethea, she's put together a contact sheet as well. We may need to password protect the contact info sheet. If so, I would just email you that password so you could click it and also receive that as well. Well, thank you again for the time you've taken to watch this video. I hope this is helpful. I hope that as we gather and pray and discern and lean into God's future, we can do so with great expectation for what God continues to want to do in our midst. Thank you for your willingness to serve. I am excited and feel privileged and honored to be called to serve with you again in this new year. God bless.